I want to take you on a visual journey of somebody living with cancer as it pertains to certain conditions that I am experiencing and living, but I'm going to give it to you in a perspective of somebody with a dyslexic mind that's extremely visual. When I talk about head pressures, I explain it to people like somebody had jammed a helmet that's 3 times too small, and the helmet's made out of lead. I want you to have that on your head all the time. Now, you know that crank in the back? Well, imagine having it cranked just randomly, having it crank out of the blue, having it crank while you're sleeping. That's what I say to people. That it's always there. It's not 0. It's always at 1 and up, right? So it's always there, and it goes from 1 to 10, right? And the 1 to 10 like that could happen at night when you're sleeping. So what I say to my wife and daughter is when I'm sleeping, at times it feels like I'm sleeping with a rock on my head, right? And everything I'm going to tell you right now comes from the perspective of a man with an upbringing that never let them see a sweat, right? That commercial comes from the older generation. Guys, they never let them see a sweat, right? So I come from that perspective, and I want to live that perspective. I don't want to be that perspective that had that look on their face, and no disrespect again, but I don't want to live in that perspective of the canes and the mobile devices and getting so freaking big you can't do nothing, right? I don't want to get to that perspective. So therefore, I tend to live with it. And those that are walking amongst you, they walk with a smile on their face and they're living with this, right? The head pressures and that also, whether it's the medication, but I've had this for a while now. You feel like you always want to vomit, right? You always, but not, and look, again, the perspective of the headache, think of the ride that spins your freaking head. You know those rides you come off of and you spun so much that you feel like vomiting? So that's what I'm talking about. So that head pressure at times creates that, I just got off a ride that spun my freaking brain upside inside and inside in, and then I want to vomit, but you don't vomit, but you feel like vomiting. That is a constant side effect, I gather. And then you live with it. And then the fatigue, I've talked about this in the past, right? Cold showers help me. For myself, I don't want to use sleeping pills. You have your magnesiums and your supplements, but there's times I have to take sleeping pills. Otherwise, and you can never catch up on your sleep. Always remember that. But otherwise, I'd be freaking exhausted. So I have to take a sleeping pill at times, and sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a row, especially if you get the, unfortunately, if I was to get rid of things in my life, number 1 would be the cancer, right? Number 2 would be the head pressures that I'm just talking about. And number 3 would be the electrocutions in my legs, which comes from lesions in my spine, and that the prognosis of lesions in your spine is electrocutions in your leg. Thank goodness the lesions are benign. So whether they're caused by the cancer, caused by occupational illness, working out of a truck for 14 years and construction accident and etc. So occupational illness or just genetics, right? You gotta look at it how you want. But the good thing is it's non-cancerous. The bad thing is it causes electrocutions in my leg. So my top 3, get rid of the cancer obviously, get rid of the head pressures that I'm talking about, the 3 size too small helmet, the need to vomit all the time, and then the electrocutions in my leg. And when I say I don't want to carry through life, meaning I don't want people to see me that way, because that comes from my upbringing. That comes from my mother and father. And I've touched on this before, but when I say my mother kept her smile on, she kept her smile on all the way through. Inside the ALS, she had bowel cancer. They had to operate on her. They had her so high on freaking morphine. I remember that. It was hilarious, right? With poor mom, we were all laughing at her. Like, some of the reactions were crazy. But if they didn't operate on her, I had to explain to her that the bowels were going to reverse. If they do not operate on you, they're telling us that your bowels are going to reverse and you're going to choke to death on your own bowels. So I had to explain that to her, me and my sisters and brother, etc., and went through the details with her, so she had no choice. So we went ahead with it, but there's also that possibility she might die on the operation table, given her state of her age, full-on ALS, Lou Gehrig, the devil himself. But anyways, she went through that, came out with a smile on her face, all the way through to her death, a smile on her face. And that always imprinted in me. right? Everything in a struggle, and see the tears running down her face and telling me, I was showing up with a smile on her face. And the other one's my father. Thank goodness it was only 10 days. And in the last 10 days of his life, he had 5 massive strokes that basically he became half paralyzed and couldn't even feed himself. And when I say couldn't feed himself, I'm talking about like completely paralyzed. When I say couldn't feed himself, and I remember walking into the hospital room, and that they're picking up the meal, they're leaving with the meal, and I said to him, like, asked him if he ate, but he was half paralyzed and half delusional, and in those 10 days, and then he couldn't answer me, so I went back to the guy and I wanted the meal, but he said he had to pick up the meal, and then. I'm pretty sure I got a plate off of him, or my sister brought a plate or something. But when I fed him, I mean, like a dog with a bone, man. It was crazy how hungry he was. Then I came to realize at that time that, look, they're not feeding him. He's paralyzed. Remember, he can't move. They're not feeding him. They're dropping off the tray and they're picking up the tray. And we were there at every meal, because otherwise, there's a large possibility he wouldn't have eaten, right? It's like, and I don't care how much money, how much pension, benefit, and salary you're receiving, and or if you're working for a cheap employer that the delivery of meals is more important than the actual eating of the patient. I don't give a rat's ass. I'll never hide behind a paycheck. Never. And if to see somebody not eat and just picking up the meal and dropping off the meal, picking up the meal, dropping off the meal, and if you're seeing that day in, day out, and the health and well-being of that patient, it comes second to the schedule of delivery of meals and pickup of meals, no thank you, right? That's the mindset of leaving the food and the water outside of a cage that's locked with a hungry dog in it. Same mindset. So, when I looked at my father in his last 10 days of life, and in going through all that, and he beat those 5 massive strokes, and the last day he sat on his bed and he wanted to go home, in those days when he was coherent and between the strokes and all that, he looked at my brother and I, and we were there, and then basically he told us individually, he told us together, he repeated himself to the sense of, he told us we had families. He says, your job is not to be here every day. Remember, only 10 days, not 10 years, 10 days. But World War II veteran, people that went through the Depression, a man that helped with his sister, helped raise his 6 younger siblings because both parents died at the age of 20 and 21. And his last 10 days of life, that's all he wanted of us. He's a man that opened his own doors through life, and he always provided. He told us to take care of our families. To go, our jobs and our duties was our wife and children. My daughter was only, the second daughter, Eva, was only 18 months old. My father passed away, and Maddie was 18 months, a little over 18 months. I don't want to stay emotional here, but that's where it comes from. That's where that strength and that vision of seeing myself intrinsically, always having a smile on my face, never let them see a sweat. And to go through life, and I can't reiterate more so than with gloves off, the blood of a gladiator, with peacefulness in my heart and knowledge on my mind, right? That if I can't express that more, right? So there's somebody that said to me recently, his wife went through cancer, and she told him, Pina told Carlos that, nobody knows what John Guy's going through but John Guy and people that survive cancer, right? Or people that are living it. And it's so true because there's so many different steps of it. And I've talked to a beautiful soul today her cancer came back, and now it's pancreatic cancer. So like my sister, 3 cancers back to back to back. And her last 10 years of her life, like basically the last 5 years was just sleep, like sleeping in bed and the num-nums and the disoriented schedule and the sleeping in the day and staying up at night. Oh, that's not living. That's not living. And that's why I'm doing everything that I can to live as strong and vibrantly that I can, to live off the earth. Like this beautiful soul said today, we should be all living like that from day one. From day one. It's coming from people that There's not a day that you go There's not a day that you go without appreciating every moment of life. Make it count. Big healthy hugs from me to you.